Hello everyone, welcome to HIM 216, and this will be our final lecture covering Chapter 8 in your textbook. I want you to turn to page 158 in your textbook, and we're going to cover root operations that always involve a device. You can see what these root operations are. And again, if you will go back in your textbook to pages 98 and 99, you will see on page 99 root operations that always involve a device. And this means that the device is left in the body. So go review those. So basically, these always involve a device. So if there is no device involved, then you can't use one of these root operations. You always have to have a device. So in your textbook, they start with the root operation change. And change is when we take out a device from the body and put back an identical or similar device in that same body part. We do not cut or puncture the skin or the subcutaneous membrane. If you cut or puncture the skin, then the approach has to become external. So there's absolutely you are changing out a device. And the example they have here is change of tracheostomy tube. So in the index, if we go to change trachea, 0B21, we find that it fills in the code with the exception of the device, and we would choose F for the tracheostomy device, and then there is no qualifier. So you can see that if we look at change, it's change device in, and there are a number of options here. And of course, they go to the appropriate body system based on where you are changing that device. The next root operation that we're going to look at is insertion. And when we look at insertion, this is putting in a device that either monitors, assists, performs, or prevents a physiological function, but it does not take the place of a body part. So in order to code the insertion root operation, the main objective or the intent of that procedure must be the insertion of that device. There are times when the device is not the main objective of the procedure, so then that procedure would be coded to the appropriate root operation and not to insertion. For instance, when a chest tube's inserted and it's left in to drain a pleural infusion, the intent of that procedure is drainage, and then the device is the sixth character, which is drainage device. So let's look at the example they have in your textbook. They're putting in a single array chest generation and a percutaneous lead. So we have to code the insertion of the chest generator, and we have to also include the insertion of this lead. So in the index, when we are putting in a device, we go to insertion of device in. If you look at insertion, it's really not appropriate, so we look at insertion of device in. And anytime we're putting in something like a pulse generator or a pacemaker or a defibrillator, that device is actually going into the subcutaneous tissue. So we need to get, why am I not working here? Okay, now I'm working. Subcutaneous tissue and fascia. And Typically, this is going into, it will either go into the abdomen or the chest. Usually the chest. The documentation will tell you. And so that takes us to table 0JH6. And this does not tell us an approach, so we are coding it to open. And then this is a single array. So if we come over and we look at all of our possible options here, we will see that we have simulator generator, single array, and we would choose that, and then there is no qualifier. So 0JH60BC. Now we also have to do the insertion of the lead. And so we are coding this. If we do insertion, so we are doing insertion of a device in the brain, and that sends us to table 00H0. And we know that for this particular procedure, the lead is percutaneous. It tells us that it's a percutaneous lead insertion, and it's a neurostimulator lead, and there is no qualifier. And of course, an operative report would give you much more detail about this procedure. Now let's look on the page top of page 159. And we're looking at the root operation of replacement. Replacement is when we put in or on a biological or synthetic material that physically takes the place or function of all or a portion of a body part. And this can be a joint replacement, a heart valve replacement, free skin grafts, keratoplasty, prosthetic lens insertion. So when a patient has a cataract extraction, they remove the lens and insert a new lens. In replacement procedures, the removal of the native body part is included in the initial replacement procedure. So for a knee replacement, the removal of the patient's knee joint is not coded. You can't replace it if in fact you don't remove it first. So that's a part of the procedure. But if there is any subsequent replacement of that joint, then so they replaced it once and now they actually have to take out the joint they replaced and do another total knee, then you do have to code the removal of the previous prosthesis. If the hardware's failed and it has to be replaced, then you would assign a code for the removal and then the replacement. Anything that comes from an animal is zooplastic. If it's composed of animal tissue and synthetic material, if it's a bioprosthesis, we code it to zooplastic. Now, I want to show you something else. If I go to subcutaneous tissue of chest, if I go back to that, sorry about that, I want to show you that if I am putting in a pacemaker, the pacemakers are listed here. There are single chamber pacemakers, there are dual chamber pacemakers that are rate responsive, then there are just dual chamber pacemakers. There are pacemaker pulse generators, there are defibrillators. The documentation will tell you very clearly what type of pacemaker or what type of defibrillator the patient received. And of course, that's the one that you will code. The selection of the device doesn't affect the qualifier, but you do have to code the insertion of the leads when a patient has a pacemaker. Single chamber means there is just one lead. Dual chamber means that there are two leads. And we will look at an example of this when I go over the PowerPoint presentations. So to go back to page 159, we're replacing an aortic valve. So we would go to replacement valve aortic. It would take us to the table. We would select our approach, and we know that this one is open and that it is zooplastic and there is no qualifier. So that is how we would assign the code for this particular procedure. Now, when a patient has a mastectomy and the breast reconstruction is performed at the same time as the mastectomy, we only code the replacement of the breast, that reconstruction code. And this just doesn't seem right, does it? It seems like you should code the mastectomy and then you should code the reconstruction, but you don't. You code the replacement of the breast. So in this example that we have a total mastectomy with an immediate TRAM reconstruction, and it is done on the right breast. So we do reconstruction breast right, 0 HRT. Our approach is open, and it's an autologous tissue substitute, and it's a trans rectus abdominis myocutaneous flap. So that's the TRAM. And so that is how we come up with that TRAM, that code for that replacement. The next root operation your book discusses is removal, which is taking out or off a device from the body. It's not replaced. Some examples of removal include a patient having a removal of a central line, which in reality we would not code. We would not code the removal of the chest tube or other drainage device. Removal of a fixation device. Yes, that is something that we could potentially code because they may actually do that with anesthesia. The main objective of the procedure has to be to remove a device. The insertion codes have more descriptive value devices than we have in removal. And so let's look at this example. Removal of internal fixation device from the left upper femur. And yes, this is something we would code because it would be done in surgery under general anesthesia. So if I put removal, and so we don't have femur. Well, we should have femur. And so I want you to notice something here. I've put removal. Look at where all these codes are going to. They are not going to medical surgical. So if I put in removal of device from, then I'm going to find femur. And this was the upper femur on the left, 0QP7. Our example says this was an open removal, and this was an internal fixation device, and there's no qualifier. So 0Q P704Z. Now, the root operation of revision is correcting, to the extent possible, a malfunctioning or displaced device. This could be a pacemaker lead or an adjustment to a knee prosthesis. Sometimes physicians will document a revision, but they are completely redoing the procedure. That's not a revision. And it should be coded to the root operation that is actually being performed. So on the top of page 160, we have a pacemaker lead that's repositioned percutaneously with the use of a guide wire. So we would choose reposition, hold on. So if we are repositioning a device, we're going to revision of device in, and then we would choose heart, 0 WWA. For this particular procedure, our approach is percutaneous, and we are repositioning a cardiac lead. Okay, so let's see, what are we looking at here? Oh, I'm sorry, I have the wrong body part chosen. I chose head instead of heart. Sorry about that. The approach percutaneous. You see that changes the device. Now we choose cardiac lead, and there is no quantifier. So 02 WA3MZ. Now, supplement is when we put in a biological or synthetic material that reinforces or augments. And the best example of this is when mesh is used when a hernia repair is done. And if the belief is that maybe a patient has recurrent hernias, which means their abdominal muscles, that abdominal wall, is too weak to hold the intestines in, so they will supplement that with mesh. They also resurface joints. They can do an aortic valve annuloplasty, vertebroplasties. There are different types of supplement materials that they can use. And in the index, we go to supplement. That is our root operation. Now, in this example, in your textbook, they've done a percutaneous vertebroplasty with a synthetic supplement. Let's if we try to put in vertebroplasty, we are not going to find a term for vertebroplasty. So we're going to have to choose supplement. And we are supplementing when we look in here. If we put in a V to look up vertebroplasty, we will not find that. We have to know that we are supplementing. Well, I don't find it for upper bone either. Okay. So if we go to supplement and then vertebrae, we'll find thoracic, and that's what we're doing with the vertebroplasty. So this takes us to the table, and we can actually choose our approach, and then we're choosing a synthetic substitute, and there's no qualifier. And I can't tell you enough times that if you were actually coding these in real life, you would have much better documentation so that you would easily be able to identify the body parts that were involved with this. So for this lecture, I want you to answer in exercise 8.6 on page 160, answer question number 1 and question number 5. And these are certainly examples of procedures that you would code. When we put in an ET tube, typically we're coding that for a patient that is put on a ventilator. They put in an ET tube before they start that ventilation. Root operations that involve examination only. I want to show you the difference between map. You'll notice that there is map and there is mapping. And when we're looking at, cardiac mapping, the example on page 161, you'll want to write this down. Cardiac mapping is a conduction mechanism. When they map the heart, it's conduction. And that code is 0K28, and typically it's 3ZZ. It's percutaneous. So you may want to make yourself a note of that. When we're talking about inspection procedures, if it's the approach, we don't code it. So for example, if a patient has a colonoscopy and a polyp is removed, the inspection basically is a part of the approach, and only the polypectomy is coded. If there are multiple tubular body parts that are inspected, only the most distal part of the body, the farthest one away, is coded. For example, if they do a cystourethropy, they're inspecting the bladder and the ureters, but we would code only the inspection of the ureters because they have to go through the bladder to get to the ureters. If multiple non-tubular body parts in a region are inspected, the body part that specifies that entire region should be coded. So for instance, if they do an exploratory laparotomy and they inspect the abdomen, it's coded to the peritoneal cavity. If there's an inspection procedure and another procedure performed on the same body part during the same episode, if the inspection's performed using a different approach than the other procedure, then the inspection procedure is coded separately. And if the intended root operation is attempted using one approach but it's converted to a different, then you code both. And the example is with a lap chole that's converted to an open, the lap chole is coded to an inspection, and then you're coding the open cholecystectomy. And you can see that coded for you. And the open procedure is the definitive procedure. It's the therapeutic procedure. It's coded first. And so if I go to cholecystectomy, if they're taking out the gallbladder, they are typically taking out the entire gallbladder. Then I can choose my approach as open once I get to the table. And as a reminder, you always code from the table. This is not a complete code. All procedure codes are 7 characters. And when you find a 4-character code in the index, you click on it, you go to the table, complete the characters, and that 7-character code is your procedure code. It's seldom a code actually from the index. And then we would code the inspection of the gallbladder, 0FJ4, and this approach should be percutaneous endoscopic, and there would be no device and no qualifier. On the bottom of page 161, there are 2 root operations. that include other repairs. They are control and repair, and control is only used when we're trying to stop a post-procedural bleed. There are very few procedures that actually fall into that category. Your book gives you those examples. And then repair is when we're restoring to the extent possible a body part to its normal function. And an example is a herniorrhaphy without a prosthesis, without supplement, and suturing of lacerations. So the root operation for repair should only be chosen when there is no other root operation that applies, and no device should be left in at the end of the repair procedure, or it's not going to be a repair. Now, there are also root operations that include other objectives: alteration, creation, and fusion. So if we look at alteration in the index, we'll find that we have a number of options here, but typically alteration is used for plastic surgery. We're modifying a structure of a body part without affecting the functioning of that body part. Brow lifts, facelift, breast augmentation are some examples of those. A blepharoplasty can be performed for obstructed vision. It would then be medically necessary. Usually those have to be pre-surgered before they are done. Now, creation is used for very specific purposes, and if we look at this in the index, creation is typically for creating a penis in a female and a vagina in a male. So if we're looking at the perineum of a female and we are looking at non-autologous tissue and we're creating a penis, we would use this code. If it's actually the perineum of the male and we're creating a vagina, we would also choose the approach. I doubt you will ever be coding those. Those are typically done in very specialized procedures. Insurance doesn't pay for those, and so I've actually never worked anywhere where we performed those procedures. And then fusion is typically where we are joining together articulating body parts and they're being rendered mobile. So these are typically joints, and the cervical joints can be fused, fingers can be fused, toes can be fused. And for instance, if we look at cervical vertebrae, we have the one joint if it's more than one joint, two or more, and then we have thoracic. We have the different joints, elbows, wrists, so on and so forth. So that's documentation would be very specific. You have the approach, which is usually open, and then you have the type of device and the qualifiers. And the qualifiers typically are specific to cervical fusions, spinal fusions, that type thing. I want us to look at some examples, and we'll only look at a few. And this is an open placement of a dual chamber pacemaker into the right atrium and the right ventricle. So we're using two leads, one into the right atrium, one into the right ventricle. And the pacemaker goes into the subcutaneous tissue of the abdomen. So the question here is, how many codes would we have? And we would actually have three, one for the pacemaker and one for each lead. And we would have two different body systems that we would be coding this for. So let's remember this. It's a dual chamber pacemaker, one lead in the atrium, one lead in the ventricle. So if we're putting in a pacemaker, we're putting the device in, and we said that this was the subcutaneous tissue of the abdomen. So that would be 0JH8, and this is a dual chamber pacemaker. Our approach is open. And so our code becomes 0JH06Z. Now we have to code the insertion of the leads. And that one is going into the atrium, and we actually said that this would be the right atrium and the right ventricle, so we would choose atrium right. 02H6. Our approach was open, and this is a cardiac lead for a pacemaker, and there's no qualifier. 02H60JZ. And then we're also putting the other lead into the right ventricle. So we go down here and pick ventricle right. And so that code is 02HK0JC. So the only difference in the code for the leads is the body part. Percutaneous insertion of both bone growth stimulator electrode into the left femoral shaft. Okay, so this one has been tricky in the past. I don't think they have updated the PCS, but we'll see if they have. Now, where are we putting this? We're putting it in the femur, in the femoral shaft. So let's put insertion of device in femoral shaft, and it was the left. Okay, so this table comes up, and for the device, do you see a bone growth stimulator? No. So I didn't choose the shaft. I'm sorry. Left. Okay. So look at that. There's bone growth stimulator, but we can't get to it. We can't use it with femoral shaft. So this is not always the best way, but sometimes if I unclick that and I click on bone growth stimulator, look at that. I have to choose lower bone. The only body part I can choose that goes with bone growth stimulator is lower bone. So it's lower bone. My approach was percutaneous, and there's no qualifier. And so this is the code. If I went to insertion of a device in bone lower, it would take me right to that table. But if I don't know to do that, and I actually choose the femur, and I can't get to what I need, this is an example of when I am going to go to another table, another area, character, and choose it, and then see what pops up. Now, the last procedure that I want to demonstrate for you is a cataract procedure. And when a cataract is replaced, it's called a phacoemulsification, and that's when they take out one lens and then they implant the new lens. And this is actually of the right eye. So if I go to this table and look up phacoemulsification with implant, you can see that that is a replacement. So I am going to go to that table with IOL replacement, and this was the right eye, and it is percutaneous, and it's a synthetic substitute. So our code here will be 08R 13JZ. Did I do that right? It's the right eye, not the left eye. I'm sorry about that. 08R 03JZ. R, right, 03JZ. So I hope this has helped you with these root operations. This lecture's a little longer because I did not want to have one more lecture for Chapter 8. If you have any other questions about this chapter, please do let me know. And we did go over the homework exercise in the first lecture, so that will conclude this lecture for Chapter 8.